This is one of my favorite weeks because this is actually not easy stuff, but really, really critical for you to see. This is the big thing. This is the big American contribution to the field of government and the way we think about doing government. And particularly, you have to understand some fairly difficult reading. You know, you had a chance to read Federalist 9 and 10 and 47 through 51 this week. And that's not easy reading, but keep in mind, these 85 essays that we call the Federalist Papers today were things that our countrymen read over the morning coffee in the 1780s. So we can bone up to the plate and try to read. These are arguments. These are people making arguments about things, about the virtues of the Constitution, responding to other arguments. And this would have been what people would have chatted about, you know, in the coffee shops and in the restaurants and over meals during the day. They would have said, hey, did you read Federalist 9? What do you think of that? You know, because the country was having a national debate at the time. So anyway, this is one of my favorite weeks to help you through some material that are really, really helpful. If you look at high school AP courses, understanding Federalist 9 and 10, particularly 10, and the separation of powers is always sort of at the top of the list. So this is a really key one. So strap yourselves in today. If it's hot, feel free to fan yourself. I may shed this jacket at some point. It's getting a little cooler in here, I hope so. So anyway, let me go back now and remind you of something that you would have seen last week. Sync this up here. Whoa, that's really pathetic. There we go. This is something that you all would have seen last week. And I want to just sort of throw it up there again to remind you of where we're headed today. The first half of class, we're going to be talking about this. And we're going to tie it to contemporary American politics and an issue that's on your plate today. And it's called faction. And there is something going on in American politics today. In fact, it's largely the debate of this next election. How we settle an issue regarding something I'll introduce you here today will largely decide who will be the next president of the United States. So I want you to be informed of this, and we'll look at it both sort of historically and then in the contemporary fashion. So there's two ways your liberties can be threatened. From the very people, your peers. Your peers can use the instruments of government to oppress you. That's called factions, and it's really bad if majorities form around these factions, and we'll unpack that. And then the second half of class today, we'll look at the question of how the government itself can be your oppressor. That's the danger from without. And the general answer to that question is, you separate the government's powers so that they don't become a tyrant over you. And that's essentially the argument that was looked at in Federalist 47 through 51. But just to give you a snippet of sort of the fact that the guys who wore powdered wigs and brass-buckled shoes knew about these issues, look at this slide again while I read to you from Federalist 51. This is what you all would have read for this week, and this may have escaped you. In Federalist 51, Madison says this: in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed. So there needs to be enough power in government to control us in a legitimate way. Law and order, you know, that kind of thing. But, he says, in the next place, you must oblige it to control itself. And that's the dual project that we're going to see before us today. How do we have a federal government or a national government that is sufficiently powerful to do things that the old Articles government couldn't do? But once you create a government with real independent power, how do you keep it from being oppressive to you? Now that's an interesting discussion of an 18th century, 19th century question, but it's also a question you have to ask today. I mean, if you don't think we have an oppressive government, and it's likely that we don't have the kind of oppressive government that some of our framers worried about, but if I were to write the words on the board IRS, that would scare you, right? If you get a piece of mail and it has on the return address some Internal Revenue Service, post office box or something, I don't know about you, that makes me nervous. That's an arm of the federal government that can really have an impact in your life, and not particularly good one. So this is a question that we'll sort of ask in a contemporary light after we walk through it in a historical light. Okay, the solution to this issue is found in, so the solution to that first issue that we saw on the last slide is found in Federalist 9, 10, and the first half of 51. Sorry, the back half. Again, so the solution to faction, something called the extended republic. This is where it gets a little funky, and I want to make sure we walk through this very slowly so you see what's going on. The solution to the potential problem of your peers oppressing you is found in something rather weird sounding right now called the extended republic, or the enlargement of the orbit. What in the world is that? It's not gum. And that's what Madison lays out in Federalist 9 and 10, and the back half of Federalist 51, he sort of repeats this. The solution to the government not being oppressive to us is found in Federalist 47 through 51 predominantly, and there the answer is the classic, what's called the slicing and dicing of American government. You slice it this way and you slice it this way, and we'll walk through that after we have a nice break from this heat in this room. Okay, so that's our project today. And now we'll start walking through the first element of this. What did you all notice regarding Federalist 9? There was something about the history of past republics. And again, I raised these issues on your Blackboard discussion questions. So as you read those, I understand those are a little more difficult reading, and I didn't expect you to master all of it, but I wanted you to give it a good faith reading. Did anybody see what in Federalist 9 they talked about the history of past republics and having problems with? Did anybody pick up on that? No?
Is it the state of perpetual vibration between?
Yes. Good. Very nice. That's a nice, careful reading. So do you have that in front of you? You'd like to read that for us?
Read that entire sentence.
Let's start.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah, let's just start at a firm union.
Okay. A firm union will be the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between extremes of tyranny and anarchy. Okay, somebody want to take a shot at a couple things here. Now, in Federalist 10, this issue was addressed. What is a faction? So here in Federalist 9, Hamilton, and I believe Federalist 10 is a Madisonian, says that a firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against something he calls domestic faction. What's a faction? Wouldn't it have been great if he just sort of defined that for us in Federalist 10? I mean, it would have been awesome if he would have said, by a faction, I mean, and then just told us. That'd be awesome. Wouldn't it? It'd be incredible. You got it? Did he really do that? Please tell us. What do you call a faction?
A number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority, of the whole who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or interest.
Okay, excellent, ma'am. Oh, isn't that great when they actually write well and they tell us what a faction is? By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the good of the whole, good of the country. So how would you, if you were, if as you encounter that, and if you're looking here, it's on page 72 of Federalist 10, what do you think the operative word there is in that definition of faction? An operative word is one that sort of really, when that word is added, it really makes hay and drives the definition of, in this case, a faction. It's part of it, but it's not. It's a key element of the definition, but it's not the operative word. Anybody else want to take a stab at that? Take a stab.
Citizens?
I mean, it is pointing out. That's so you have a nice start on it here because you're pointing to the citizen aspect of it. She's pointing to the united. So it's something when citizens get together in a unified sense. But we do this all the time. I mean, I contact every semester when I find out that there's a Missourian on campus. I find that person. And I invite them to the shrine to the St. Louis Cardinals, which is in Sutherland 103. So if you've been in my office, it's a mini shrine to the St. Louis Cardinals. It is idolatry. I'll just admit it. I do worship this team. But we have a little interest of common about the St. Louis Cardinals. Is that any big deal to you? That's not a problem to you. What if we had another similar group that met in my office? It was a group of guys. Since this is dominant with ladies, this will get your attention. So let's say these few gentlemen that populate the back of the room and I meet on a weekly basis, and we are scheming to make sure that these guys don't have to do any work in Political Science 225 this semester, and that all of these guys' work will be done by the ladies this semester. How's that different than if these guys were all St. Louis Cardinal fans and we met? Why is that different? Yeah. Huh? Well, we have an interest in the Cardinals, and we have an interest in these guys having their work done by all you ladies. Yeah?
It affects everyone else.
How does it affect you ladies?
So we have to do more work.
Is that good?
No.
Which leads us to the operative word in this adverse. No big deal if we get together and talk about the Cardinals and what things are going to be like with Albert Pujols playing out here in Anaheim and whether Yadi Molina is going to re-sign and all that stuff. That is no big deal. But if we're sitting here going, I bet if we did this in a crafty kind of way, these guys could just get a free ride this semester and all you girls would just pick it up. You know, you just pick up all their work. Wait a minute. Now we've got an interest that's not just an interest, it's adverse to the rights of other citizens. That's a faction. So adverse is the key term here. That has been in Federalist 9 that we read here. That's been the Achilles heels of past republics. When people coalesce around interests that are adverse to the rights of other citizens in past republics, he says in Federalist 9, you have insurrections and bloody violence. Do you recall reading a couple weeks ago a little bit of bloody violence taking place in the United States? Yeah, Shays Rebellion, all this nasty stuff. Some of this factiousness turned violent. Some of it was about to in an economic sense, which we'll make sure we talk about today. So this has been the history of past republics, he says. Look at it. All these petty republics of Greece and Italy have been miserable failures, and they have vibrated back and forth between tyranny and anarchy. Tyranny's not too hard to sort of figure out, right? I mean, if you were under a tyranny, you'd know what that would feel like. What's anarchy?
Chaos.
Why is it chaos?
Isn't it like when everybody just like does whatever they
Yeah,
want all the time?
yeah, it's lawlessness, right? So why would a political society, these petty republics of Greece and Italy, vibrate back and forth like a ping pong match between tyranny and anarchy? Why are those opposites of each other? What's the opposite of an anarchy versus a tyranny?
Tyranny, one
Yeah.
Anarchy is everyone else making their own decisions.
Okay. So let's camp on the tyranny first. In a tyranny, there's usually one person that rules. How do they rule?
Force.
With force, usually oppressive force. You know, it's not, you don't want to be under a tyranny. If I announced to you today, welcome to the United States of America, Barack Obama is our tyrant, you'd probably apply for citizenship elsewhere, wouldn't you? You don't want to be ruled by a tyrant. Is there law and order, though, within tyrannies? Yeah, sometimes at the point of a gun, but nevertheless, law and order. There's no law and order in anarchies. Why would a tyrannous situation necessarily lead to an anarchy?
Just there being too much order and people fleeing from that order.
Oppression. Yeah, you have order, but it's oppressive. And so you throw off the tyrant, and now you don't have any ruler, and everybody does sort of their own thing. And when everybody does their own thing, you don't have law and order anymore. Then what happens? You go back to a tyranny because you want law and order again. That's been the history of past republics, and what has caused this vibration back and forth, this nasty ping pong match between tyranny and anarchy, has been factiousness. That's the problem that we're looking at first half of class today. And he goes on to say in Federalist 9 that if you can't find a solution to this problem that's been the perennial Achilles heel of Republican styles of governance, these petty republics, then you just give up on that kind of government and you do something else. What rides in and saves the day? It's like what you see on a cereal box every morning. It's what would be in the back of the calf. I know you guys get cereal in a different way. It's already been taken out of the box. But if you were to shake a cereal box every morning and it said, usually in these cereal boxes it says something about the virtues of the product. What do they talk about? It's new and improved. You know, your Wheaties or your Cocoa Puffs are new and improved. And thankfully, there's been some new improvements in what he calls the science of government that's made it possible that we might be able to save Republican government, which is, by the way, what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do here, isn't it? We're trying to create a Republican style of government, and if we can't escape faction, then we've got a big problem. So what were some of those improvements? Did you pick up on any of those? The regular distribution of power into distinct departments. What's that sound like? Sorry? The separate branches of government. Would it shock you to know that we have 3 separate branches of government? Wow, looks like we did that one. What's next?
It says the introduction of legislative branches and checks.
Okay, the introduction of legislative balances and checks. Do we have this? Yeah, seems like we did that one too. Keep going.
The institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior.
We got that too. If you're not familiar with the judicial branch, we'll talk about that in the second half of the semester, but we do that too. Judges, federal judges, for the most part, are appointed for lifetime. They don't have to sort of submit themselves to election and all this stuff. So we do that. What? Okay, keep going.
The representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election.
Do we do that? Do we actually elect representatives who go represent us in distant bodies? Yeah, we do that. So it looks like we're doing all these. And yet he has one more that he offers us, doesn't he? And that's getting at this. So further on down the page, do you see where he adds another to this great laundry list of improvements to the science of government? I shall endeavor to add one more, he says. See that? Here it is. To this catalog of circumstances that tend to the lessening or amelioration of the systems, I shall venture, however novel it may appear, to add one more on the principle which has been made the foundation of an objection to the new Constitution. I mean the enlargement of the orbit. Weird sounding language, right? I mean, you could read that 100 times, you're like, what in the world is he talking about? The enlargement of the orbit. This is very key for you to see, because you won't follow anything here for the next 45 minutes unless you understand what he's talking about with the enlargement of the orbit. It means, and boy, I wish I had some chalkboard here to do this with. Think about what was the largest essential governing entity under the Articles of Confederation? A state. It was 13 separate little nations sort of in this mutual cooperation pact. So the state was the largest political entity in the deal. In your reading this week in chapter 5, they had this nice chart that showed you the difference between a national or unitary system and a confederal system and a federal system. Under that old confederal system, under the Articles of Confederation, the largest sphere of governance happened at your state. Under this new system, we will have a national government that will govern over the entire country. Don't we have that today? Yeah? So that's the enlargement of the orbit, or what he calls the extension of the sphere, that you will now have a new national government that will govern over the whole territory, the whole nation. That's the enlargement of the orbit, or the extension of the sphere. It's going bigger than states. And we are talking geographic extension. More people, more territory being governed. And he thinks there's going to be some perks that go along with that. And the biggest of the biggie perks is that it's going to solve this problem of faction. Follow so far? That's going to lead us into Federalist 10. So let's make sure we hit all the highlights of Federalist 9 first. Important aspects of the paper. Well, as you saw, the history of past republics has been pretty nasty. It's been a perpetual vibration between tyranny and anarchy, and if you can't find a solution to that, then you give up on those kinds of government systems and do something else. Fortunately, like your cereal this morning, there's been new and improved. Like when I go home and do the laundry, and I see on the laundry box, new and improved, I think, well, why did I ever buy the old stuff? You know, I mean, it's awful. So we have new and improved improvements in the science of government, and we've listed them, but the most unique amongst them is the American contribution to the improvements in the science of government, and it's the enlargement of the orbit, or the extension of the sphere. And that's really the topic of Federalist 10. This rather odd-sounding phrase, and the fact that we're now going to govern through this document over the entire country, is going to be the solution to factiousness. Okay, is everybody on board with that project? Okay, so what did you get from Federalist 10? What's going on there? We're going to spend about 40 minutes unpacking Federalist 10 for you. I want you to master that argument. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I just wanted to know what insurrection is.
Insurrection is what you saw, violence, overthrow of existing authority. If there was an insurrection that happened in this classroom, I would be worried about it. If I start to see you all look like you're going to rush the stage here, I think an insurrection might take place. And one of the key root cause, Federalist 9 argues, for insurrection is factiousness in society. People coalescing around interests that are adverse to the rights of other people. And those people who have their liberties trod upon don't like it. And they push back, and the people who are trying to oppress them push back, and pretty soon you get guns and knives drawn, and you get blood flowing in the street. So the violence that was indicative of these insurrections caused by faction in past republics generally got violent and ugly. And lo and behold, for the first 7 years of our country's existence, it seemed that we were headed in the very same direction. So these guys ride in on the white horse, these advocates, these Federalists of the Constitution, and say, we have a solution to this. And they saw themselves as doing something that nobody in the history of mankind had been able to do, is to develop a Republican government that would get beyond this problem of faction, that we had a solution to it. Okay? So Federalist 10, what did you pick up snippets? And we'll walk through it piece by piece, but I'm curious to hear from you as you read it this past week. What did you pick up from Federalist 10 in terms of some of the thoughts about how we're going to deal with this problem of faction? And it's okay if you just get partial pieces of it. It'll be helpful for us to just see what you got, and then we'll add to that. You ready? You thinking about throwing something out there? It sounds like, I mean, you already gave us faction. That was good. You found that. That was really good. Good. Excellent. There is a very follow the bouncing ball kind of argument that's going to be made here. And at first pass, this can seem pretty intimidating, but it's actually a pretty simple kind of argument. I'm going to relate it to some things that you already know about. So read that again.
The inference to which we are brought is that the causes of faction cannot be removed and that relief is only to be sought in the means of controlling its effects.
Okay. In a nutshell, this is sort of the bottom line to Federalist 10, is what she's already captured. That you are never going to be able to totally eliminate factiousness, meaning people will always get together around common interests, right? I mean, that you're just not going to do that. Federalist 10 at bottom line, and we'll have to see how we get there, but Federalist 10 at the bottom line argues this, that the way that the new system is being designed in the new Constitution will control for the effects of faction. It'll control for them. You can't eliminate it, it'll control for them. Someday, maybe this is, you're sort of on the other side of it now, but someday you'll show up to a parents' meeting at a church, at a school of some sort, and the topic will be whether it's realistic to teach our children abstinence in the sexual area, or whether we should teach safe sex. Federalist 10 is taking more of the latter view. I mean, it's not in the sexual arena, obviously, but it's saying, look, what is the argument for safe sex? Sorry to be so crass about it, but it's just a great example that sort of ties this together well. What's the argument? What if I'm an advocate what if I'm the only advocate of abstinence in here, and you all are sort of safe sex advocates? What are you going to tell me? Why am I ridiculous? Yeah.
Everyone's already doing it.
They're going to do it anyway, so you better make it safe. That's exactly right. Another way to say that is, it's inevitable that our kids are going to be sexually active. You just have to control for the effects of it. That's what Federalist 10 is saying. That's why your piece there was very key. It's factiousness and the potential violence that can come from factiousness is inevitable, so you design a system of government that controls for the effects of it and makes them less likely to form and go violent. That's Federalist 10. Now, you had a question.
Well,
It could be the same issue if you're saying that because evolution, at least within the public school system, has such a, what's called a hegemony or quarter on the market, that it's oppressive to people who want intelligent design or creationism or something along that line taught.
well, it's almost like it's switched because there was intelligent
Oh,
design,
yeah.
then there wasn't
Oh,
intelligent
yeah.
design, so now
Come in,
it
yeah.
went from a smaller faction, now it's the larger one, and now we have the smaller
Now that's
faction of intelligent design.
And that's the next piece. It's one thing to talk about a faction. It's another thing to talk about the fact when a faction coalesces around a majority of people. Let me give you a snippet to where I'm headed here in terms of 2012 and what's on your plate right now. What would happen in this country if we ever got a majority of people in the country who had no financial stake in it, meaning they didn't pay any taxes? What would happen? If I stood before the American public and said, vote for me, I'll continue to give you freebies. and you don't have to pay for them. Other people will have to pay for them. Do we have a factiousness forming? Is it a majority? How many people in this country, what percentage of the American public do you think pays 0 federal income tax? 48% today, and the number's going up. Okay? Now, I'm not trying not to be too partisan here in this regard, but this is on your and our plate today. The issue is that we have a system of taxation where the minority of people pay the vast majority they bear the burden of the deal here. What percentage of the federal tax burden do you think 10% of the wage earners in this country, the top 10% of wage earners, pay how much percent of the federal tax burden? 70. But it's a good chunk. It's a really good chunk. The top 1% pay almost half. Okay? So you have the potential in the country, and this may bother you because you may be sort of supportive of one sort of political party or the other, but this is what we have to decide in a country. When a politician stands before and says, vote for me, I'll continue to give out all kinds of handouts, and a growing number of people in the country don't have to worry about paying for it, we'll make this minority pay more, pay their fair share, we may have a majority faction forming around this issue of money and our situation in the country. So this isn't some crusty, 18th century discussion. This is a discussion that we need to have as Americans today. And they might be right. I mean, they might be right. Maybe they're not paying their fair share. Maybe when the top 10% of wage earners pay 70% of the federal tax burden, that's not enough. I don't think so, but nevertheless, if the argument is that the rich in this country are not paying their fair share, the minority, rich, you got to ask yourself how much more do they need to pay? That just, I don't want to sort of get into a partisan discussion. I want to leave this at the level of where we're talking about it today. But that's the issue that's before us today. All right, back to Federalist 10. Let's walk through this argument systematically so that you can see it and we'll get it. You sort of see, if you see the bottom line, you'll see where we're headed. Now let's show you the bread trail of how Madison walks us to the promised land here. So important aspects of the paper. The first is, and you see this from the very first sentence of the essay, is that this new proposed system of government will have the tendency to do something, break and control the violence of faction. It doesn't guarantee that factiousness will go away or that the effects of factiousness will go away, but that this new system of government will have the tendency to. Do you hear me? No, it doesn't guarantee it, and you'll see why here as we go forward. Then, as our scholar in the back has already alluded us to, he tells us what a faction is. Mark that in your book. That's a very important thing. If you don't understand what a faction is, and he defines it for you there, then you're off to the wrong start. So there on that page that it was read earlier, make sure you understand what a faction is. He's going to argue here, and we'll walk through this argument systematically, that faction seems inevitable and you need to control for it. In other words, you can't eliminate factions, so you have to, like our safe sex argument. If you're an advocate of sort of safe sex, you're arguing, look, this is inevitable, you control for its effects. It's the same kind of argument that Federalist 10's making. Sorry about that. I wish I could raise the screen up a little bit for you. Isn't this interesting? He says in Federalist 10, and we'll look at this here in a second, that the most common source of factional divide in political systems is between those who have more and those who have less. Isn't it interesting that we find ourselves in the country today essentially having those kinds of political divides? You can see politicians stand up at podiums looking all nice and pretty and say, the rich aren't paying their fair share, we need to tax them more. You can see other people dressed up just as pretty saying the rich are already paying their fair share In fact, it might be that this 48% of the people might need to kick in something to help out because we're almost $16 trillion in debt, and you can take all of those rich minority people's money, and that ain't going to deal with the solution. That's a mathematical certainty. That you could take all of the money of the top 10% of wage earners in this country, and it would put hardly a nick in this $16 trillion in debt. So that's not the solution. So why would it be offered as a potential solution if everybody knows that it's not going to help? Maybe to generate a divide in this country, and that has a nice little way of working out electorally for you if you can make it work. And the solution, as we'll see here, is this extended republic, this extension of the sphere, the enlargement of the orbit. That is going to be the key to making factiousness less likely. Okay? So now we get to the detail of his argument. And we've already got a snippet with this piece that's already been read here in Federalist 10 already. So here's the basic argument. And you can see it here in a very simple outline. Now I want to return to Federalist 10 and read you what you read during this week, and you may have sort of, in the midst of it all, sort of missed it, but I want to return to it so you have it. Publius, oh, by the way, I may not have said this. You might have noticed at the end of these Federalist papers, you see this rather odd signature, Publius. That was the anonymous pseudonym that Madison and Hamilton and John Jay assumed during that day. Because if they would have signed it Alexander Hamilton, there would have been a large sector of the population that wouldn't even have read it. Because we hate Hamilton, we're not going to read it. But if you sign it Publius, then people will give it a fair hearing. It's sort of a common thing of the day. And Publius was some old Roman guy who saved the Republic, and these guys were saying, we're going to save the Republic with this great new Constitution. All right, so there are two ways of dealing with factions, says Madison in Federalist 10. One is by destroying liberty, or giving everyone the same opinions, or you can remove their causes by doing A or B, or you can control for the effects of faction. Essentially, the bulk of Federalist 10 is saying this, that the extended republic will give us certain virtues that will control for the effects of faction. These two can be taken care of pretty quickly. So let's see what you learned during your reading last week. If there are two ways of dealing with faction, 1 and 2, let's concentrate on 1. Maybe we'll just remove their causes. Maybe we'll just deny people liberty, so they can't have interests that they could coalesce around. Why isn't that a good solution? Yeah.
It says liberty is to faction what air is to fire.
Okay. So maybe I have a brilliant idea. I've noticed that there's a lot of fires in the LA area. My solution is to get a giant vacuum cleaner and suck all the oxygen out of the Southern California area. That'll take care of fires here in the LA area, won't it? But what's that the proverbial example of? Well, that's the cure that's worse than the disease, right? All right, okay, fair enough. You going there too? All right. So we could destroy liberty, and you'll see within Federalist 10, look at it again. You'll see more after today. That it's kind of fun to sort of see more as you reread this thing real quick later. The first solution is, well, maybe you could do away with faction. You could remove the causes of it by denying people liberty. No, that's bad. Because in a society that values freedom, you want people to be able to express liberty, so you can't deny them. That's not going to do it. How about giving everyone the same opinions and interests? That'll do it. Yeah? Is everybody? If I took, yeah, what do you want to add to that?
Like brainwashing?
Maybe, but why would we have to brainwash people to give them all the same interests? Because in the normal course of affairs, go ahead.
If you
Okay. Do you see the argument here? This is a nice little bouncing ball kind of argument. Did you want to throw in here, or is that?
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, giving everyone the same opinions or interests is really gonna make them bitter about it.
Is it even
Yeah.
possible?
No, it's not, because you can't change what someone thinks, and you can't change what someone likes. You can force them to look like they like something, but you can't make them actually
Right.
like it.
Good. So it's a pipe dream, isn't it? It's an absolute pipe dream. You can't, yeah, you could destroy people's liberty. You could establish a tyranny, and you could deny people liberty, and you could eliminate factions in that way. Well, that's the cure that killed the patient. If you're interested in a form of government that values freedom, you don't go here. Well, maybe you can give people freedom, and then in some way you force them in some way to have all the same opinions. Here, Madison argues, that's a pipe dream. That's not going to happen. So, if this is the cure that killed the patient, you don't want to go there, and this is a pipe dream, your only thing left is just to control for the effects of it. That's why this is the safe sex argument. Essentially, what the safe sex advocate is saying is, you don't want to destroy adolescents' liberties, and you can't give them all the same opinion about abstinence, so you got to control for the effects of an activity that they're just inevitably going to be involved in. That's essentially the same argument that Madison makes here, not pertaining obviously to sexual activity, but to factiousness. So the real key to Federalist 10 is seeing how the extended republic controls for the effects of faction. It's sort of like, I can't even say it. It's the ultimate safe sex tool for factiousness in political societies. We'll just sort of leave it at that. Okay, too many ladies in here to talk frankly. All right, so what does Federalist 10 propose then as a solution that would control for the effects of faction? The solution is not found in a pure democracy, but in a representative republic. In other words, the way you get to be able to govern over a whole territory is through a system of representation, what he calls a scheme of representation in here. So here on the top of page 76, this is where he's arguing essentially this. From this view of the subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and minister the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. What he's doing here, friends, is he's saying, look, how do you get to an extended republic? You don't get to it through a pure democracy. What's a pure democracy? Do we have that here in the United States of America? What is it?
It's where the people decide on everything.
Yes, right. So it's a system where you have a pure democracy. There's no representation of any kind. You represent yourself, and everybody else does the same thing. Think of the old Greek city-states and all that, ancient Greek and that kind of democracy. He's saying you can't govern over an extended territory like that. So let's personalize it. Let's say we were trying to govern Biola University in that way. Let's step back and ask, could we govern ourselves? Let's say this was our little country. Could we govern ourselves in a pure democracy in this class? It's somewhat manageable. What do we got, about 30 of us in here? It's somewhat manageable. I mean, if there were issues that were presented on a day-to-day basis that we needed to consider, we could all sort of weigh in and we could hear the poor 4 guys in the back of there, and sorry guys, you're going to be outvoted quick, which gets to the issue that we're going to have a problem with here. But we could sort of talk about things. What if we tried to govern Biola University like that? Why not? Why couldn't we govern Biola like that? If every decision that affected Biola University, all students, all faculty, all staff had to weigh in on, why would that not work in Biola University versus in our small little setting here?
The issues would just pile up because nothing would ever be resolved.
Yeah, the fancy word is it's unwieldy. That system of government is unwieldy over the larger setting than the small. So that's his argument for why a system of representation allows you to govern over a larger territory. Why? Because think about it. If we wanted to govern the larger territory of Biola, maybe we would just elect one of us to go represent this class at some body that met every once in a while down in the gymnasium or something, right? Then we could govern over the extended territory of Biola. So if the solution to majority faction is to be found in an extended republic, the only way you get to an extended republic is through a system of representation like we have, don't we? Where states get representatives who go and represent people at the federal level. That's how the system's supposed to work. And in this extended republic with a system of representation is going to be the key to solving the problem of faction. Is that starting to sort of fall in line to you? Okay. Now there's a piece here that we need to, that we're going to add a little fine tuning to, and then that's it. Then you'll have the argument. So let me make this personal to you, and I can't think of a better example than the males versus females in this particular class. Let's say that we wanted to take a vote on a measure, and the vote was, well, one of the sexes here is going to do the other sex's work for the rest of the semester. So we're going to take a couple votes, and we're going to say, all right, in the first vote, we're going to say that all the females will do the males' work the rest of the semester. Shall we vote on this now? Let's vote. The proposition on the table, friends, in this class, not a live option, thankfully, but a hypothetical one, is that for the rest of the semester, the females will do all the males' work in this class. They won't have to lift a finger, and they're going to get A's. Okay? Shall we vote on it? Come on, men, be honest. Even the cameramen voted. Who's against such a proposition? Oh, sorry guys, you got outvoted. Was there a faction formed over there and here? Was there a faction formed? Why was it a faction?
Because it was adverse to the rights of the rest.
But it formed under a what? A minority. What if I changed the proposition? What if I said that now the proposition that we'll all vote for is the men will do all the ladies' work? Think about how, I'm not even going to ask for a show of hands on that, ladies, because you're women of virtue and I wouldn't want to reveal otherwise to you. So let's hypothetically say we take that vote and a lot of hands go up and the poor 4 guys in the back of the room vote nay. Now you have a majority faction and they feel it, don't they? That's what's to be avoided. The history of past republics are when factions form around majorities, and instead of submitting to that kind of thing, those guys fight you and you fight back, and we get nasty stuff going on in the history of republics. What he's arguing in Federalist 10 is that the enlargement of the orbit, or the extension of the sphere, governing over a larger territory, is going to be the solution to reduce the possibility that such a faction would form. So let's enlarge our republic right now. Let's invite 3 more classes into this room and take the same kind of vote on those measures. So right now, let's say we vote on the following measure. Will the males do all the work in this class for everybody? And the females raise their hands and overwhelmingly outvote these poor 4 guys in the back of the room, and they're under a majority tyranny, right? What would happen? How would the dynamic change if we enlarged the sphere and invited more people into the room? We just went around to these beautiful classrooms surrounding us and invited more people into the room. How would the dynamic change? There'd probably be more men. What else would be different about the dynamic of that vote? Possibly. if enough men came in, and then the women might have to get worried. What else would change? Are we going to invite more women in the room? What kind of women would come into the room where these guys would feel safer?
The age demographic would also change.
Maybe some more mature ladies would come in. Maybe we'd invite some juniors and senior women in who weren't so doggone selfish as the freshman and sophomore women are. I'm only speaking hypothetically here, ladies. Don't sue me. So these guys would feel safer in that enlarged sphere because not only would more men show up, but there would be more right-thinking women who might show up, who had brothers, husbands. They knew guys, and they may know these guys. Do you see how the dynamics change? That's point number 2 here, that some of you can't even see because it's so far down on the screen. That's, in an enlarged republic, you get a greater variety of interest. And it makes minorities safer in that regard. Do you see that? That's where he says in Federalist 10, and here's the fancy language, so if you're following it, here it is on page 78. Extend the sphere, and you take in a greater variety of parties and interest, and you make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens. That's fancy language for what you just saw play out here. When you enlarge the republic, you bring in a greater variety of interests, and you make it less likely that factious majorities would form because of that new dynamic. The other benefit of an extended republic is that you get a better pool of candidates. Do you remember last week when we were talking about anti-federalism and they said you get better representation at the small level, right? Because I might know this person who represents me and all this stuff. The Federalists say, no. You get better representation from larger pools of people because you're getting the best of the best there. So when you send the best of the best to Congress, they're not going to vote in these crazy ways. They're not going to vote to enslave minorities of men. They would be men of attractive merit and character who would, when such propositions would be raised on the floor, would, oh, that's crazy, we won't vote for that. Those two attributes of extended republics, getting better candidates with more variety of interests, make it less likely that factious majorities would form. So I'll end our discussion of this by raising one more time what we're facing in this country today. It is a live option in this country today, at least to gain electoral votes and votes of the people in this next coming election, to raise before us as Americans or interested third parties. Interested third party, right? You're a citizen of another country? Am I thinking? Oh, okay. My bad. Too many classes I teach here. So it is a live option that we are going to sort of pit a majority of people in the country versus a minority of the people in the country and say that the minority, in this case, those who are better off socioeconomically, should carry an increased burden in federal taxation. That's the argument. You might like it, but that's the argument. And I won't say who's making that argument, but it wouldn't take you too long to sort of poke around on the internet and figure out who's making that kind of argument. It's a very much more difficult argument to respond to that. It's much more difficult because the other one sounds very easy. Those who have more should be given more. The following passage was recently invoked by a notable politician. To whom much has been given, much is required. You familiar with this passage of Scripture? That was used as a argument, a biblical allusion type argument, that the rich need to pay more. To whom much has been given, much is required. Now, one might argue, in this context that we find ourselves, that to whom much has been given already, much is already required. I mean, if you're really among sort of the upper crusty crust of incomes in this country, you're paying probably somewhere close to 50% of your income in taxes. So you're only working for 50 cents on the dollar already. The option is, should we have those folks pay more so that we can continue to give away more in terms of federal entitlements and this kind of thing? The answer to that question may be yes. The answer to that question may be no. That's what you have to think about as we go forward. So this argument of Federalist 10 isn't just some crusty theoretical argument made back 200 years ago. It's still a live option for us to think about today. So again, I'm trying not to be too particularly partisan with the issue, and I'm trying not to present sort of a straw man argument unfavorable, but that's the issue we have out there today, is we have $16 trillion in debt, and now we have to figure out how we're going to deal with it. Should we just tax people with means more? Now the reason the other side, the hard argument is make is, the other side has to make the following argument. You should actually lower taxes on those people who have more, so that they can, when they have more, they can be the sort of generators of society. So these rich people who have more means might invest those things in new businesses, they might hire other people, and it has sort of a trickle up effect. That's a really hard argument to make, to say that rich people need to keep more money. Whoa. But that's sort of the current lay of the land today. It's a much easier argument to generate, and some people have this sense of envy or covetousness and say, yeah, get those people. But you need to be thinking about it a little more carefully, and that's really the key for us as we think about Federalist 10 in this kind of deal. Okay, so let's break the heat, get out of here for a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about that other one, this idea that now the government itself could become oppressive to us.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.